12 years ago, an 8-year-old girl vanished from the peaceful town of Cedarbrook Hollow after telling her mother she was going to check on an injured dog near the woods. Despite endless searches and no trace ever found, her mother never stopped baking her favorite cookies each morning, just in case she came back. Everyone else moved on. Until one spring day, a rusted pink bicycle was pulled from beneath a garage floor, and with it, a truth more haunting than anyone had dared to imagine. Cedarbrook Hollow awoke to the chirping of birds and the scent of damp grass wafting over the old wooden steps. Sunlight filtered through the maple trees lining the porch, scattering honeyed light onto the gray roof tiles faded with age. In the small wooden house nestled behind a white fence draped in climbing vines, Laura Forrester had been awake since before sunrise. She tied her hair back, put on an apron, and washed her hands before beginning her familiar routine, baking for her small shop, located just off the porch. The old oven clicked and groaned, and the aroma of flour, butter, and almonds gradually filled the kitchen, creating a scent that made passers-by turn their heads. On a wooden chair beside the dining table, Emily, her 8-year-old daughter with soft brown hair tied in a side ponytail, sat swinging her legs, a coloring book in her hands. She wore a light blue checkered dress, the hem a little wrinkled but still clean. Whenever Laura glanced over, Emily would beam, revealing her gapped front teeth. "Look at my drawing, Mom," Emily said, holding out the page she'd been coloring. "I can write my name now, in capital letters !" Laura wiped her hands on her apron and bent down to look. On the paper was the word Emily, slightly tilted, a little shaky, but full of effort. "Beautiful," she smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. Emily giggled and then placed the book on the table. "Are you making almond cookies?" "Yes, a regular customer ordered a batch today, but I'll save a few for you." "Give me one now." The little girl leaned back, pouting playfully. "So I can put it in my bike basket. If I see that hurt dog, I'll give it to him." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Hurt dog?" "I saw him yesterday. He was lying near the fence at the edge of the woods, tiny with yellow fur. I think his leg hurts. I want to bike out there today and check on him." Laura hesitated. Cedarbrook Hollow was a peaceful town. People often left their doors unlocked and children played freely everywhere. But the edge of the woods was different. It was where the town ended and nature began, wild and unpredictable. "You can't go deep into the woods, okay?" Emily nodded vigorously. "I know. I'll just stay around here. I just want to see if he's still there." Laura carefully wrapped a cookie in a clean piece of wax paper and then sat down beside her daughter for a moment. She knew there was much to do that morning, but this moment, seeing Emily's sparkling eyes, her hands cradling the small cookie like a treasure, made her reluctant to rush. "Where did you put your napkin?" she asked. Emily opened her bike basket, in which was already a pale purple handkerchief that she usually used to wipe her hands. She gently placed the cookie inside and smoothed the fabric over it, as if afraid of breaking it. "I want to. If I really do see that dog, I'm going to sit down. Give it to him and say, 'It's okay, I'm here now,'" Emily said, her voice small but resolute. Laura chuckled, both touched and a little worried. The little girl continued, "I saw him, but he was lying still. I didn't dare get close. Today, I'm going to get a little closer." Remember what I told you, Emily. Don't go too far, and if you see anyone strange, turn around and come straight home." "Okay?" "I know, Mom." Emily looked up, and Laura bent down, adjusted her daughter's shoelaces, and gave her a quick hug, just a fleeting embrace like every other morning. But that hug would later be the only thing that remained intact in her memory. The feeling of that small body nestled in her arms, the scent of her daughter's hair, a mix of strawberry cream and early morning sunshine. Laura watched Emily run outside, her little legs pedaling the bicycle with determination. The girl even turned back to shout, "Make orange cake this afternoon, okay, Mom?" "We'll see if you're good," Laura replied, wiping her hands on her apron, standing in the doorway and watching her go. She didn't know why she stood there so long. There was something, vague, as thin as kitchen smoke, that kept her from taking her eyes off the small figure of her daughter fading into the distance. A thought flashed through her mind, very quickly, like a small echo in her heart. What if she doesn't come back? She laughed and shook her head. What am I thinking? This is Cedarbrook Hollow, after all. The cookies in the oven began to give off their scent, and the clock showed almost 8. Laura went back inside, continuing her work as usual. Her hands kneaded the dough, and her eyes glanced at the clock, a habit she could never break. Around 11 in the morning, the sun was high in the sky, casting a gentle light onto the eaves of Laura's small bakery. In front of the door, regular customers came and went, buying a few loaves of bread, some almond cookies still slightly warm from the oven. Everything was peaceful, steady like a piece of music without a climax. Laura glanced at the clock. The minute hand had just passed the number 10. She paused for a moment. Usually, Emily would ride her bike around and come back past 10 o'clock, put away her bike, wash her hands, and ask for another piece of orange cake. Today, there was still no sound of the familiar bicycle rattling outside the alley. Nor was there the sound of, "Mom, I'm home," echoing into the kitchen. It's okay, she reassured herself. Maybe she saw a friend and is playing a little longer. But 15 minutes later, when the last batch of cookies came out of the oven, Laura had taken off her oven mitts, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped out onto the porch. She stood there in the sunlight, looking towards the dirt road where Emily had disappeared from sight that morning. The road was still empty. The wind gently pushed the trees, but there was no sound of a bicycle, no sign of a blue dress bouncing on a pink bike seat. A strange premonition arose, an invisible sound, humming in her chest. Not a noise, but an absence, as if everything around her was still there, except for a familiar heartbeat that had stopped. "Maggie," Laura called to the neighbor's house, where a silver-haired woman was watering flowers. "Have you seen Emily this morning?" Maggie shook her head, smiling. "No, dear. She didn't bike past here like she usually does." Laura nodded slightly, thanking her, but her smile had faded. She continued to ask a few more houses along the road. Some hadn't noticed, others had only seen something like someone riding a bike towards the end of the road, but not sure. No one had actually seen Emily after she left the house. Laura's hands tightened on her apron strings. She turned back, put away the oven, locked the shop, and began to walk quickly down the small dirt road that ran along the town fence. That was where Emily had said the puppy was lying, the edge of the woods, where maple trees crowded out the light and grass grew thick underfoot. On the wet grass, she saw a faint footprint, not very clear, but enough to make her heart clench. Not Emily's. The footprint was larger, heavier, heading towards the woods, but then it disappeared among the fallen leaves and bushes. "Emily!" Laura called out loudly. No one answered, only the sound of the wind whistling softly and a few frightened birds flying from a high branch. "Emily, where are you?" Her voice cracked. For the first time since Emily was born, she felt absolute fear. No mother is prepared for that. She ran along the fence, calling hoarsely. Sometimes she stopped, putting her hand to her chest, as if to suppress the trembling that was spreading throughout her body. The townspeople came when they heard the call. A search was quickly organized. The police were called, then tracking dogs, and then a volunteer search team. They searched the woods throughout the afternoon and into the evening, shining flashlights, shouting Emily's name like a prayer. Not a sound, no blood, no torn clothing, no crying, no clues. As night fell, the town still had no answers. It wasn't raining, but the wind was colder than usual. Laura sat huddled on the sofa in front of the house, her eyes vacant, her hands clutching the purple handkerchief found near the bicycle. When the last police officer came up, shaking his head, she didn't cry, didn't scream. She asked only one question. "Did anyone hear anything?" The young police officer bowed his head. "No, Mrs. Laura, no one heard anything at all." Laura returned home when people advised her to rest. She walked into Emily's room, the small room, pale cream, with a few scribbled drawings of the child hanging. On the bed, the pillow still smelled of Emily's hair, the blanket still folded neatly as it was this morning. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Then slowly, very slowly, she opened the wardrobe door. Each small shirt hung neatly, some new shoes placed next to each other at the foot of the closet. Each item contained memories. Each button, each fold, made her chest ache like needles. Laura leaned over, hugging her daughter's pillow tightly. She didn't cry out loud, only broken breaths like someone sinking to the bottom of the water, struggling in silence that no one knew. That night, the town was still silent, but only Laura felt the world had stopped spinning. A huge silence cracked in her heart. No sound, no image, just absolute emptiness. And in that emptiness began a never-ending wait. The searches gradually thinned out. News in the newspapers about the disappearance became less and less, and then stopped altogether. Only Laura, the single mother who had only Emily as the light of her life, refused to give up. But day after day, news about the girl was zero. She seemed to disappear off the face of the earth. Then time passed. 12 years later, Cedarbrook Hollow was still the same, or at least what was left of it. A few houses changed owners. A few roof tiles were repaired. A few grocery stores closed and opened with new signs. But overall, the town was still peaceful, slow like a piece of music that didn't need a climax. As for Laura, she was different. More gray hair, more wrinkled skin, slower steps. But that gaze, the way she looked out the road every morning, the way she reached out and dusted the old photograph of Emily, was exactly the same as 12 years ago. She had grown old, but her inner self stood still on the day Emily did not return. Every morning, Laura still woke up at 5 a.m., wearing an apron, turning on the oven, kneading the dough carefully as if preparing for an important meal. The first batches of almond cookies were always made from the butter that Emily had chosen, the kind with a mild scent, not too sweet. She still kept the habit of taking a separate cookie, the smallest but the most golden and beautiful, placing it in the old pink tin box and putting it on the kitchen shelf, the highest place. She didn't eat it, nor throw it away. Every day just replace it with a new one, as if there was someone who still needed it. Emily's room was still there, intact as the day she stepped out the door for the last time. The bedsheets were washed every week, toys arranged neatly in wooden boxes under the desk. She even still put flowers in a small porcelain vase next to the bed, even though she knew no one would sniff the scent. Laura didn't cry every day anymore. She had gradually adapted how to live with the emptiness, how to put memories into small actions. But sometimes, when the evening sun shone into the room, casting a shadow of the empty chair where Emily used to sit and read, she found herself suffocating, as if the air in the house was sucked clean by just an empty seat. Some nights, Laura didn't sleep. She opened the large map, spread out on the dining table, marking with a red pen the places she had been to find Emily. Some places were old parks, some were edges of forests, some were gas stations in the next town. Some points were crossed out, meaning they had been found. Some were circled, meaning they would return again. Every week she chose a point. She no longer hoped to find Emily there. But if she didn't go, she wouldn't be able to live. Each marked point was a heartbeat. Each return was a reminder. Mom is still looking for you. Once, during a visit to the town supermarket next door, Laura saw a brown-haired girl, a long face, eyes that looked so much like Emily that she gasped. The girl was standing picking cakes in the counter. Laura approached. Each step was as heavy as stepping into an old dream. When she stood close enough to hear the girl's soft breathing, she called, "Emily?" The girl turned back. Not her. There was no birthmark in the shape of a bird wing behind her ear, no familiar look. And then, the girl stepped back, her face changed, looking at her like a stranger. She walked quickly out the door, almost running. Laura stood stunned in the middle of the cake counter. She did not cry, but her hands clenched so hard that the nylon bag in her hand crumpled, the cake crumbs broken inside. Such times were not uncommon. But Laura still did not stop. The townspeople began to get used to her silent presence. A thin figure, old coat, riding her bike slowly through the streets, her eyes always looking for something that others could not see. Some people pitied her, invited her to church, gave her Easter cakes. Some began to avoid her, thinking that she lived in a delusion, that it was time to let go. As for Laura, she didn't need anyone to understand. She just needed Emily. Although retired, Harland occasionally visited Laura's bakery, bringing some red apples from the back garden or a package of broken coffee. He didn't talk about the case anymore. No hypotheses, no notes, no questioning. Just sit down, sometimes sip a cup of tea, sometimes tell a mundane story with no beginning and no end, to give Laura some relief after the terrible events, and also to make her feel less lonely. "As long as you still wake up every morning, bake cakes and look out the door," he once said, "then everything has never really ended." Laura was grateful to him, not because he was good, but because he never said, "It's time to forget." Harland's timely silence sometimes carried more weight than any encouragement. On Emily's 20th birthday, Laura woke up earlier than usual. She made a special batch of cookies, orange jam cookies, the kind Emily had asked her mother to learn how to make at all costs. Then she wrote a letter, her hands shaking so that the letters were uneven, but each stroke carried the image of a mother putting her whole heart on the paper. "Emily, today you are 20 years old. You may be somewhere not far from me, or you've been very far away. But if you remember, today is the day I get to be a mother, and that's still the happiest day of my life. I've lived 12 years without you, but I've never stopped thinking about you for a day." She folded the letter, placed it under her daughter's pillow, as if still believing that one day Emily would come home, sit back there, open it, read it, and understand that Mom has never left. One spring morning, the wind blew gently from the woods, carrying the scent of wildflowers and old dust. On the road along Cedarbrook Hollow, the yellow excavator of the Kiewit Construction Company was roaring rhythmically. The renovation of an old house into a homestay was coming to the excavation stage. The old garage was demolished to be rebuilt from scratch. The thick layer of concrete covered with dust was being drilled into pieces. A worker was shoveling the soil when the blade hit something hard but not rock, a sound ringing out sharply, dryly. He stopped, signaling. Another group came forward, began digging by hand. A piece of cement gave way to something that gradually revealed itself. Rust, dust, but with a clear shape. A metal frame. When pulled up, it was a pink bicycle. The frame was corroded, the handlebars were completely to the side, the front wheel was dented, the paint was almost faded. But there was still a small sticker of a yellow dog stuck on the side of the basket. There was no mistake. There could be no coincidence. This news quickly reached Detective Harland. He knew it was a new step in the case and called Laura immediately. When the phone rang, she was wiping the glass of the cake cabinet. Detective Harland's voice rang out on the other end of the line. Slowly, carefully, but just hearing the two words, bicycle. Her hands trembled. The towel fell from her hands. Her eyes panicked like someone who had just heard a relative calling from the grave. Laura arrived at the scene less than half an hour later. She didn't say much. No one needed to introduce her to the object pulled from the ground. That bicycle, once a part of Emily's childhood. She remembered every sticker, every scratch, every time Emily fell and put the bike up with her two small arms. That sticker of a small dog. Emily stuck it herself, after being taken by her mother to the fair and buying the first sticker book. Now, it lay there, broken and silent, like the childhood frozen in the cement. Laura knelt down next to the bike, her hands raised, trembling slightly to touch the handlebars, as if afraid of breaking another memory that was too fragile. No one said anything. The entire group of workers stood still. Only the sound of the wind and the excavator from afar still rang out as if in another world. "You were here," she whispered, her voice almost broken. Harlan stood there, stunned. His hair was white, his posture slow, but his eyes were still sharp. He no longer wore a badge, but to Laura, he was the only person she allowed to step into her nightmare without explanation. He bent down, observing the bike carefully. "There's still a sticker. And here," he pointed to the seat, "a speckled blue paint." He took out his phone to take a picture, then signaled to a young officer to collect the sample. "It may be a clue," he muttered. Laura said nothing more. She sat down on the cold ground, the bike on her lap, like a child unconscious that never wakes up. Everyone looked at her, but no one dared touch her. They knew that at this moment, just one wrong gesture could completely break a mother who was clinging to her pain. A young officer approached, about to speak, but Harlan stopped him. "Leave her alone." A few seconds later, a sob burst out. Small, then gradually larger, as if breaking the wall of silence that had been built up for so many years around that mother. Laura hugged the bike, her head bowed to the bent handlebars, her shoulders shaking in waves like overflowing banks. She cried like a child, the cry without words, without sentences, only tears and sobbing, not because she found Emily, but because she knew her child had been so close, right in this town, where she had lived, passed by, lit candles to pray, and she didn't know. She burst out a soft call. "Baby, Mom is here." No one answered. Harlan approached, placing his hand on her shoulder. "We'll track it down. This is real, Laura, not a vague hope anymore." She looked up. Her face was wet, her eyes swollen, but something was returning in her gaze. Not blind faith, but the instinct to live again of a mother who had been asleep in pain for too long. "We have to continue. We must not give up," she said. "She's waiting for us." Harlan nodded. When leaving the construction site, Laura took a plastic bag containing each piece of broken bike, each piece of broken plastic, as if collecting her daughter's shattered memories. That night, she put the bike, now cleaned of dust, in Emily's room. Right next to the window frame, where the moonlight often shines every night, and she sat there, looking at it for a long time. The bike didn't answer. But for the first time in 12 years, Laura didn't feel like she was calling into the void. That evening, the town was as quiet as usual. But in the small wooden house on the edge of town, a mother was sitting facing her own past. The past that had been buried under a layer of cement now returned, intact and cruel. Laura sat where Emily used to eat breakfast, in front of the oak dining table that the two mothers and children still used every morning. Next to her was the pink bicycle, cleaned of dust, placed silently as a witness who could not speak. The yellow light from the kitchen shone on the crooked bike, on the sticker of the puppy, making it look like it had just fallen out of an old dream. She sat there for a long time, hands placed on the table, where Emily used to put her coloring book. Every scratch, every burn on the wood were like silent diary entries. Memories began to return. "I saw a puppy with a sore leg. It was lying near the fence." Emily said so that morning, a fleeting sentence, on a day that seemed normal. At that time, Laura just nodded. She was busy baking, checking the oven, hearing her daughter as a familiar background sound. And then Emily left, with a cookie wrapped in paper, eager eyes, brown hair flying behind the bike. She never went back to ask more about that puppy. One late afternoon, Laura was cleaning the cake counter when Harlan came, holding a thin envelope. "There's something I think you should know," he said, his eyes calm but unable to hide his tension. Laura washed her hands, took off her apron and sat down on a wooden chair next to the door. Harlan opened the envelope, taking out a few blurry prints. "We are investigating the traces left on Emily's bike. I'm reviewing the records of buying building materials around the time Emily disappeared, focusing on the type of cement that matches the samples on the bike." He handed over the first piece of paper. "There is an order, bought in the next town 12 years ago. Not registered name, but there is a signature, paid cash." Laura picked it up. The handwriting was stiff, crooked. At the bottom, the seller left a note. Delivery to the strange, tall, thin customer wearing a cloth hat. Harland continued, his voice slow but clear. After that, we traced the delivery route of the supplier that day and checked the traffic cameras around the area. He pulled a photo from a black and white video, blurry but enough shape. A small truck stopped in front of a familiar shop. Harland pointed. This is an excerpt from the camera of the gas station at the edge of the forest. This camera is installed for security purposes. Fortunately, it still keeps the stored data. In the video, a truck stopped for about 10 minutes before continuing into the forest. Laura tilted her head. The picture was a bit blurry, but the sign in the back made her cold. It was her bakery. Harland looked at her carefully. It's not clear who's in the car, but the timing coincides completely with the cement delivery trip. And it stopped at your bakery. Laura was stunned. Her heart began to reverberate. Memories did not come like a wave, but like needles, sharp, cold, and precise. There was a man, she said slowly. Tall, thin, long coat, wearing a hat. Bought 2 cakes. Didn't talk much. Just one sentence. Such a cute little girl. Is it the morning Emily disappeared? Harland asked. She nodded. She remembered seeing it as strange, but because she was busy turning the cakes in the oven, she skipped it as usual. At that time, I didn't think anything, Laura said softly. Harland said nothing more. He left a copy of the delivery declaration and camera notes on the table. We are checking deeper, but I think this is the most worthwhile direction after so many years. Laura nodded, her eyes red. But in her heart, between layers of fatigue, something moved. It was no longer a repetition of waiting, but a clear signal. Harland turned to say to Laura, Rest assured, I will find out who he is. It will not be long. This time, I will not let him escape. Laura just nodded and said nothing. She did not need to wait long. That very night, the call from Harland came. She took a deep breath and picked up the phone. On the other end of the line, Harland's voice was deep. I found out. It's Ernest Malalari. Laura was as if dead. The name was not unfamiliar to the scale of a town like Cedarbrook Hollow. He used to be a child psychology consultant for a federal project, wrote books and spoke on forums about emotional education for adolescents. But then he was suddenly fired after being discovered manipulating research results, fabricating figures, and being investigated for signs of abuse of authority with children in the context of psychological experiments. No one prosecuted for lack of evidence. He almost disappeared from the town since then. But now, that name appeared again, coldly, right in the middle of Harland's investigation board. Laura stared at the name. Her lips pursed, her eyes blazing. The long days living in silence, in paralysis, in waiting, now gathered into one thing: anger. Do you have his picture? She asked. Harland produced an old photo. A cold face, narrow eyes like a knife. Laura nodded. That's him. He looked at her. He praised her for being cute. He waited to take her away. Suspicions grew, but Laura's self-torture came back. If today she paid more attention to the surroundings, to the dangers lurking for her baby perhaps Emily might still be here. No empty room, no red-marked map, no hugs hanging suspended for 12 years. Harland said nothing. He knew that, in such moments, comfort would only make the cut deeper. After a while, Laura stood up. Her eyes were dry, but her voice was choked. Are you still investigating? I never stop, Harland replied softly. Laura nodded. Me too. She turned to look at the bike on the table. The curve on the handlebars, the puppy sticker, the cookie in the drawing, the man with strange eyes, the scribbled words of a child who believed in good. Every piece, began to connect to each other. The past was no longer a static wall. It was beginning to move. The wooden house nestled deep in the oak forest 40 miles west of Cedarbrook Hollow. From the main road, you had to turn into a winding red dirt road with no name. cross 3 hills and a dried-up stream. The deeper you went, the more the sound of the car was sucked dry by the absolute silence of the forest. All the clues, invoices for buying materials, paint chips found on the seat, scattered notes in Ernest Mallory's file, all pointed to this location. A large wooden warehouse covered with moss and fallen leaves on the outside, crooked walls, the roof almost collapsed. Looking from afar, no one could believe that under that rotten shell was a different living world, cleverly hidden for 12 years. The task force that went with Harland had 7 people, fully equipped. Laura was not allowed to enter in the early stages. She stood outside, her heart pounding like drums, her eyes not leaving the wooden door being pried open. She didn't feel scared. What awaited her inside, whatever it was, could not be worse than the past 12 years. One of the young officers ran out, speaking quickly with Harland. He nodded and turned to Laura. There's a basement door, locked with a self-made mechanism, camouflaged with wooden floors. They're opening it. Soon after, a heavy iron door was opened. Below that was a staircase leading down to the ground. The air inside did not smell of rot as imagined. On the contrary, it was clean, dry, and disciplined. Neon lights lit up evenly, tiled floors, white painted walls. A long corridor led into a space divided into many rooms. Each room had a small bed, desk, bookshelf, even paintings. Inside the basement was wider than Laura imagined. Each room had its own door. The names were neatly posted as in a dormitory. Angel number 1, Angel number 2, Angel number 3. On the walls were handwritten slogans in black pen. The letters were even to the point of obsession. The outside world is a challenge, not a refuge. The mission is to keep yourself pure. Affection is weakness. Independence is strength. Laura stepped through each door ajar, glanced in. Each room was the same to the point of coldness. Single bed, bookshelf, reading lamp, no family photos, no teddy bears, no trace of memories. All were copied from a model, ideal environment. Sterile, emotionless, unintentionally. The girl named Angel number 2 was sitting folding paper. Her face was strangely calm, but her hands trembled slightly. On her table was a thin book, the title in Latin. When she saw Laura, she just bowed her head like a programmed machine. Laura stopped. It felt like she was lost in a bizarre school, where emotions were drained, where the girls were not beaten, but confined in their own consciousness. That basement was not bloody, no shackles, but the air was heavy as lead. The walls were white and cold, no music, laughter, or any sound suggesting life. Only the sound of electricity buzzing and the steady, soulless breath of children who used to be people. Then she went to the room at the very end. Her heart stopped beating for a beat. The last room was as simple as the other rooms, but on the table was an open notebook. On the page appeared a drawing, soft pencil strokes, detailed, clear. A small dog, lying on its side, one leg wrapped in bandages. Next to it was a bicycle with a white basket, with a picture of a dog. Emily. The girl sat by the window, her back slightly hunched. The light shone on her long brown hair, slightly tangled. She wore a gray shirt. Her hands were coloring the drawing. The movements were slow, even, like a habit that had been repeated thousands of times. Laura didn't shout. She didn't run to her. She just stood in the doorway, her throat choking. "Emily!" The girl paused, stopped coloring, then slowly turned her head. Her eyes, the eyes Laura had known better than herself, looked straight at her. No reaction, no tears, no recognition. Laura took another step. "You're Emily. Emily Forrester. My daughter." The girl blinked. Then, in a voice as light as a breath, even as if reciting, she said, "I am Angel number 1. I don't have a mother." Laura's heart was squeezed. She stood still, her lips trembling, her eyes unblinking. Emily continued. "Teacher said, 'Who gave birth to us is not who keeps us.' Angels are reborn from light, Mother is an outdated concept. She stepped back one step. Her head was dizzy as if torn in half. On this side was Emily, alive, in flesh and blood. On the other side was a stranger, recreated from memory, belief, and erasure. "Mom is your mom," Laura said pleadingly. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "You're Emily. You love almond cookies. You have a white bike basket. You used to write your name in capital letters, remember?" Emily shook her head. "I don't remember." The shake rang out like a sentence. Not the most cruel truth that Emily had died. But Emily was alive, but didn't remember her mother. Laura fell down, her hands propping up the floor, her shoulders trembling. Harland stepped to help her, but she raised her hand to stop him. "Mom's not going anywhere," she said, her voice hoarse. "Whether you remember or not, Mom is still here." Emily looked at her. For a long time, in those eyes there was something fluctuating, like a guitar string touched by the wind, not big enough to make a sound, but it existed. She turned back to the table, grabbed a pen, but instead of continuing to draw the dog, she drew another picture. A woman standing next to a bicycle, her hands raised, as if waiting for someone. Emily said nothing, but to Laura, it was the first small crack in the ice that had been closed for 12 years. A crack, enough to rekindle the seeds of love, memory, and humanity. The interrogation room was so silent that you could hear the sound of the pen touching the paper. A one-way glass separated two worlds. On one side was the investigation team, on the other was Ernest Mallory, the man who made the entire town of Cedarbrook Hollow shake when his name was mentioned again. He sat there, his hands not cuffed, his back straight, his white shirt unwrinkled, his hair neatly combed, his eyes not upset, not ashamed, only shining with the arrogant confidence of someone who believed he was right. He was captured by the task force while on his way back to his mysterious base, holding a lot of food, household items, and a pile of strange drugs of unknown origin. Harland sat opposite. Outside the glass, Laura stood watching, her eyes unblinking, her hands clenching the notebook that she could not write any more lines since Emily said, "I don't have a mother." The interrogator began with the procedure, but Ernest didn't care about the questions. He took control of the conversation, as if this was an intellectual conference that had long been awaited. "You keep calling me a kidnapper, a monster, a sicko. But have you ever asked, who created me?" No one answered. He smiled. "I used to work for your system, schools, research institutions, where numbers lie and adults bathe in arrogance. I saw children being stuffed with things that didn't belong to them. I saw them being trained like machines, like tools, instead of being raised as a soul that needed to be kept clean." Harland cut him off. "And you think you can do better?" Ernest tilted his head, his eyes sparkling with something terribly strange. "Not think. I did," he told in a slow, even voice, full of oratory. The angel rebirth theory, as he called it, was the foundation for everything he had done for 12 years. According to him, children at birth were pure seeds, but the more they lived in modern society, the more they were poisoned by hypocrisy, false emotions, and dependent affection. Children don't need parents. They need the right environment. I just cut off the rotten part that society wraps around them. Emily, according to him, was angel number 1. He chose her because her eyes were not afraid of strangers, because she knew how to listen, because she often played alone. She didn't cry when I took her away. She just asked, "Did you take the puppy to the doctor yet?" And I knew I chose the right one. He told about life in the basement. No ropes, no whips, no prohibitions by violence. Every day, the children woke up at 6 a.m., meditated for 15 minutes, studied one chapter of the Bible, then studied Latin, read classical philosophy. They were well fed, slept on time, and were never called mother. We don't say that word. Mother is an emotional concept. I don't need them to remember anyone. I need them to remember themselves. Once, Angel number 3, the youngest girl, cried and said, "I miss my mother." Ernest didn't hit, didn't scold. He just put her in a dark room. No light, no sound, no objects, and left her there for 10 days. After 10 days, she came out of there no longer calling mother. She began to pray. Harland was stunned, not because he spoke loudly, but because of the deaf silence after those stories, as if he was describing how to care for a bonsai garden, not human lives. "You think you're God?" Harland asked. Ernest shrugged. "God created people. I just adjusted it a little." Laura stood outside, her eyes stinging. She imagined Emily in that room, repeating the lessons, sitting straight, not allowed to dream, not allowed to cry. A child who used to draw puppies with crayons was now only allowed to hold pencils and draw abstract concepts. Not allowed to remember the smell of the bakery, the call, "Mother." "She will thank me," Ernest said. "All 3 will thank me. When they grow up, they will not be like the broken children out there. They will become people in the true sense of the word." Harland clenched his hand. "You don't create angels," he said softly. "You just kill childhood and wrap it in false logic." Ernest was silent for a few seconds, then smiled. A smile that made the skin of the person opposite him cold. "Childhood," he repeated, as if chewing on an obsolete word. "What is it, if not the most beautiful illusion to keep humans weak?" He sat back in his chair, composed. His eyes did not waver, his attitude unrepentant. To him, the jail was not a punishment, just a pause, as if waiting for his ideas to be recognized. Laura stepped out of the room following Harland. When the door closed behind her, she couldn't breathe. Part of her wanted to scream, wanted to throw something at him. The other part just felt empty, a type of emptiness that had no color, no name, as if standing before a wall built of cold steel words, impossible to move with tears. She thought about Emily, about the way her daughter sat, about the voice as if reciting a lesson, about the empty eyes, about the fact that Emily did not recognize her mother, not because she was beaten, but because she was intentionally erased layer by layer. "We have to help her find herself again," Laura whispered, as if swearing to herself. Harland nodded, his voice deep. "And we must start by shattering his doctrine. Not a single piece can be left out." The Psychological Recovery Center was located outside the city, a small house nestled among a birch tree garden, designed to be simple, quiet, and warm. There were no cold, white walls like a hospital, no sirens or sharp sounds of needles. Only the sound of rustling leaves, birds, and a small garden full of newly planted seedlings. Emily was in room number 12. The window faced east, where the first rays of sunlight entered through the white curtain every morning. The room had a bookshelf, a wooden table, a set of colored pencils, and a bed placed against the wall. Everything was simple, no pressure, no control. But Emily's eyes were still empty, as if everything around her was just a new coat of paint on the old world. She ate regularly, listened to the therapists, but didn't talk much, didn't react strongly, didn't cry, didn't laugh either. Almost like a walking doll. Laura came every day. She was not sudden, did not force, did not beg. She just sat there, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes in the corner of the room, carrying an old book whose words had blurred with time. It was Anne of Green Gables, which Emily used to love as a child. "Today's page is the part where Anne imagines she has been renamed," Laura whispered, as if talking to Emily of 12 years ago. "You used to giggle when you heard her call herself Cordelia." Emily did not respond. She looked out the window, her eyes not touching her mother. But Laura knew that every sentence, every syllable, even if not answered, still fell somewhere inside her. One early morning, Laura arrived earlier than usual and was allowed to walk past the common room. There, the other 2 girls, once called Angel number 2 and number 3, were folding paper into abstract shapes together. Their hands were skilled, rhythmic, but their eyes were still empty, as if doing a series of operations they had memorized. One was folding lotus flowers, Each petal was precise to perfection, but she didn't even look at it, as if it was just a geometry test. The other was reciting a passage in Latin, without pausing, without stressing, just a sound coming from a body that had never been taught how emotions worked. Laura stopped at the door, looking for a long time. None of the two girls looked up. Not a single gaze stopped at her. The only person who had never stopped searching for more than a decade. And that's when she realized Emily was different. Her daughter was not completely lost. There was something in her eyes, a hesitation, a small crack in her gaze. Emily did not look straight at her, but did not avoid her either. Not at all like the two girls, who had probably been recreated too perfectly to still no doubt. Emily still had cracks, and that crack, Laura knew, was the only place where she could sow the seeds of love, memory, and humanity again. One day, Emily stood in the garden, holding a small pot of plants. Laura quietly approached, offering a handkerchief when she saw sweat on her forehead. Emily did not receive it, nor refuse it. She just left it alone and turned away. A few days later, Laura was allowed to go to the drawing room. Emily was sitting drawing with a pencil. It was a wooden chair, a small hand holding a cookie, and a dog. Not clear, but enough to make Laura choke back tears. She approached closer, gently bent down to see the picture, and then, in a moment as accidental as thousands of moments before, her hand lightly touched Emily's hand. Emily paused. Laura almost held her breath, but this time, Emily did not withdraw her hand. The girl just stopped for a moment, then continued to draw, her hand still lightly touching her mother's hand, as if fear was no longer a reflex. After that day, something changed, not clear, not explosive. It was just that Laura realized that every time she told a story, Emily listened longer. When she told about the time the two mothers and children missed the bus and had to walk home in the rain, Emily pursed her lips, and for a fleeting second, the corner of her lips twitched slightly. Not smiling, but no longer frozen. One day, Laura walked in, seeing Emily copying a passage from the Bible in neat handwriting. "Who gives birth to us is not necessarily who keeps us." Laura was stunned. Emily saw her, did not hide, just asked softly. "Teacher used to say, dreams about mothers are hallucinations, are a sign of deviation. Every time I dream of my mother, I have to record it, then read the Bible again." Emily's voice was very soft even, but not emotionless anymore. Something was cracking from within. "But I used to dream of Mom," she said, her eyes not leaving the paper. "I dream Mom holding my hand, putting cookies in the bike basket, then saying, 'Don't go too far, Emily.'" Laura couldn't help it. Tears welled up, not as violently as a waterfall, but like each drop flowing from a heart that had been holding back tears for too long. "That's not a hallucination," she replied softly. "That's a memory. That's the truth. That's a part of you that no one has the right to erase." Emily did not answer. But that night, the caregivers said that the girl did not read the Bible before going to sleep as usual. She just lay still, facing the wall, her hands hugging the white handkerchief her mother left behind, and occasionally her hands clenched slightly. The pink bicycle had been placed back in the middle of the bakery, next to the large glass window, where the sunlight shone directly on it every morning. Next to the bike was a basket of dried flowers, a small handwritten sign in white chalk. "For Emily, one day you will remember." But before it stood there, looking up like a living witness, it had undergone a long journey to return to its form. Laura took the bike to Mr. Grant, the old bike repairman who lived a distance from the town. He used to repair Emily's bike when she was young, replaced the handlebar bell, and adjusted the brakes after Emily rushed down the hill too much. When Laura brought the old bike, the iron was rusty, the front wheel was dented, the seat was torn, the handle was cracked. But Mr. Grant didn't say a word. He just looked at her, then said in a deep voice, "I remember it. The sticker of the little dog, too. We'll keep everything the same." They worked together for several weeks. Every afternoon, after closing the bakery, Laura came to the workshop. She did not rush. Each piece of plastic was polished. Each chain was oiled. Some days she just sat and watched Mr. Grant work, her eyes looking far away. Some days she held a rag and wiped the handlebars again and again, as if cleaning 12 years of dust in her heart. One afternoon, when Laura was using fine sandpaper to clean the seat, she suddenly stopped, gently stroking the edge of the handlebars. On it, there was still a small scratch, so old that it almost blended into the faded silver paint, but she remembered it very well. "This place," she said to Mr. Grant, "is the first time Emily climbed on the bike herself, without calling Mom." She chuckled softly. "She went 3 meters and fell over. Her knees were scratched. She cried and shouted, 'But I fell myself. Mom, don't help me.'" Mr. Grant was silent. After a moment, he put a pen on the seat, drew the exact curve of the scratch, and kept it the same. "We'll leave this place," he said, "not because it's broken, but because it's real." Finally, the bike returned. Not new, not perfect, but alive, just the way Emily used to love it. And Laura put it in the right place where it used to be, next to the bakery door, as if not a day had been lost. One Sunday morning, it was clear and sunny. The April air was gentle like linen. Emily, along with a staff member of the recovery center, visited the bakery according to the outdoor therapy schedule. She still spoke little, her eyes were still far away, but her steps were no longer hesitant as before. And then she saw it. The bicycle. She stood still on the doorstep, not stepping in. Her eyes stopped at the handlebars, then glided to the white basket, stopped at the sticker of the yellow dog, exactly the shape she had chosen to stick on when she was young. Emily stepped forward, very slowly. Her hand raised, touched the handlebars. The girl's fingers touched the newly replaced rubber but still kept the same pattern. The slightly rough surface made her shiver, not because of the cold, but because it was familiar. The light smell of rubber, the smell of metal, and a faint smell of cookies from the bakery leaked out through the crack in the door, all blended together like a wisp of memory smoke passing through the mucous membranes that had been bleached. Emily closed her eyes. In that moment, very short, she saw herself, small, riding her bike around the backyard, shouting and laughing because her mother had given her another cake. She did not call Mother, but in her head rang a sound, vague, old. "Go slowly, remember?" She didn't know if it was a real memory or a fragmented imagination, but it was warm, and more real than any lesson ever taught in the basement. Laura stood behind the counter. She did not speak, did not step out. She just looked at her daughter, like someone standing from afar watching someone who had just stepped from darkness to the threshold of light. Emily turned her head slightly. "The bike?" Laura nodded. "You used to love it so much." The girl was silent. Her hand was still on the handlebars, but her hand did not shake, just squeezed lightly, as if trying to test a memory that was still real. That afternoon, after the shop closed, Emily unexpectedly walked in, without warning. She stood at the doorway, the light of the last day shining on her delicate face, somewhat gaunt but clean as the spring breeze. Her hand loosely held the apron her mother left on the table. "Mom," she paused for a moment. "I want to try making cookies." Laura turned back, stunned. In her eyes were hundreds of pieces that were being pieced together. Without saying anything, she took the mixing bowl, flour, eggs, butter. Each operation took place in silence. Emily stood next, watching her mother's hands closely, then imitating them. She didn't need to explain. Her hands were clumsy, but did not withdraw. When kneading the dough, a little broke out, falling on her hand. Emily did not panic. She just chuckled, softly, quietly, like a whisper on the lake. Laura looked up, and she saw that smile for the first time in 12 years. Not wide, not radiant, but it was really a smile, not of angel number 1. Not of the programmed girl, not of a patient, but of Emily, her daughter. That night, Laura did not sleep. She went out in front of the bakery, standing looking at the bicycle, her hand placed on the handlebars. She didn't need it to run. She just needed it to be here, reminding that there were things that seemed to have been lost, could still return. Not with reason, but with warmth, with a hand, with small things, like cookies, bike seat, stickers, and with a trembling smile, enough to revive. A year has passed. Cedarbrook Hollow was still peaceful as usual. The maple trees had turned green again after winter. On the doorstep of the small bakery at the end of the street, the pink bicycle still stood there. The paint had faded slightly in the sun and wind, but the sticker of the puppy was still intact, like a small handprint from the past that had never faded. The morning at the shop began with the smell of almond cookies and the clatter of the cookie molds hitting the tray. In the kitchen, Emily stood next to Laura, rolling the dough, the sunlight shining through the window onto that small shoulder. She didn't say much. No need. Every action between the two mothers and children had now become their own language, silent, rhythmic, enough to understand each other. When Laura turned to get the eggs, Emily automatically poured the milk. When Laura smiled, looking at the clock, Emily had put her hand on the timer. There was no magic that could erase 12 years, but every morning like that was a gentle answer of life. We still have each other. The other two girls, Angel number 2 and number 3, had been adopted by two different families in two different states. They did not leave with shouts, just a quiet farewell, a pair of eyes watching the car, an awkward hug in front of the center. One of the two, the girl with the shortest hair, sometimes still came back to visit. She brought a few small pots of flowers placed in front of the bakery and sat drinking tea on the porch. She did not call Emily's name, but the look of the two when they touched was the friendship formed in the dark and survived the light. One afternoon, Laura received a handwritten letter, the letters slow, the frame slightly tilted. It was a letter from Harland. Mrs. Laura, it has been a year since you found the light of your life again. I am writing this letter because my hands are no longer steady enough to drive to the bakery as promised. But I want you to know, it was not I who found Emily, but it was you who never gave up. In this profession, I have seen many cases closed, not because they found the person, but because people stopped believing the person was alive. You are not like that. Thank you for keeping what I could not keep longer. Faith. The letter was closed with a single black dot, not flowery. But after reading it, Laura held it for a long time in her hand. Tears did not flow. It was just that her eyes blurred with the light of the end of the day. One Saturday morning, a group of high school students in the town visited the bakery according to the extracurricular schedule. The teacher led them to sit in a row by the counter, while Laura smiled gently, took out a tray of freshly baked cookies and said, "Do you know the story about the little girl with the pink bicycle?" The children shook their heads. Laura began to tell, not detailed, not horrific, just a story about a girl who used to live in this town, liked almond cookies, used to ride her bike around with a white basket and a puppy sticker. And then one day, that girl disappeared. But, Laura smiled. The miracle is, even though it took a long time, that girl still found her way back. Not with a map, but with her mother's love, and the small things that we think are meaningless. Behind the children, Emily stood silently. She didn't interfere. She just listened, very carefully, very deeply, to every word her mother said. The wind blew into the porch. The sunlight shone through the window frame, casting the shadow of the bicycle on the red brick floor. A little girl in the group asked, "That bicycle, is it that girl's, Ms. Laura?" Laura nodded. "And now it stands here to remind you that there are things that seem to have been lost, but if we keep the fire long enough, the light will return." That afternoon, after the shop closed, Emily brought out a small box made of wood. Inside were a few white stones, a carving pen, and a piece of paper with a letter sample. She sat down next to the bicycle. Laura didn't ask. Emily gently bowed, placed her hand on the iron frame, then began to carve each stroke. The light never goes out if someone keeps the fire. Her hand no longer shook as before. Her cheeks were covered with sweat. When she finished carving, she placed her hand on the words, stroking lightly. The surface was wrinkled, rough, uneven, but deep. A permanent symbol, a wound that had been named. In the evening, when Laura brought tea to the porch, Emily had been sitting there for some time, holding a book, her eyes looking up at the sky. "Mom," she said, without turning around, I don't remember everything, but I believe everything you say." Laura sat down next to her. Both looked at the sky. The stars began to appear gradually through the trees. "It's okay," she replied. "I remember enough for both of us." In the space between the night forest and the small town, the light at the end of the forest road was still there, not brilliant, not resounding, but enough to light the way home.